something important that we need to cover is the fact that two people were actually killed during filming.
Was it
I'm
just
not.
two? I thought it was more than that.
Everything that you see is real, is really happening. Well, almost.
The birds are in misery. I don't think they sing, they just screech in pain.
All right, guys, welcome back to Awkward Purgatory. So this week, we have a very interesting movie to talk about. That is Fitzcarraldo, 1982, is that right?
1982.
Correct.
So, what a film. Definitely a lot of lore surrounding this film. And I think maybe the best place to start is to go back to what it's actually based on, the real story, because Fitzcarraldo is based on a true story, but it is maybe a little bit more loose than Herzog, the director, would like to give on. The movie is centered around a steamship being dragged over a mountain, essentially, between two rivers, in order to gain access to a new area. And in the movie, they really do this. They really drag a 200-ton steamship up a 40-degree slope and down the other side into a river. And when you look up, like, well, what really happened, it's not exactly the same thing. What really happened was that the actual person was named Carlos Fitzcarraldo, and he was a rubber baron. And so in this part of the world, this is Peru and parts of Brazil. There's lots of stands of rubber trees, and basically there was a rubber boom where all these people were buying up land, capturing land, and enslaving many natives to work for them. And there was an area that was sort of inaccessible until one very daring and very persistent baron named Fitzcarraldo decided that he could forge a new road. Forge isn't the right word, but he could create a new road to access this area through a very dense, difficult to cross terrain. And he managed to do this. He made a road, and it wasn't gathering the attention that he needed it to. And so essentially, to prove to his business partners that the road was passable, that it was a legitimate trading route, he had a steamship disassembled and carried over this road piece by piece, granted multi-ton pieces, and it still took hundreds of people to do this. But it was essentially to prove, hey, this is actually like a legitimate route that we can transport goods over. And it was so ludicrous that it gained a lot of attention. So that's what I learned about the historical events. Did you guys learn anything additional to that?
Yeah, all that.
Yeah,
All that.
that's all that.
I mean, I learned a little bit about it, but I didn't go into that much detail. I knew the Fitzcarraldo part, and I knew he crossed over the Isthmus of, I forget the name of it, but I think it's called the Isthmus of Fitzcarraldo,
Well,
actually.
they named it after him, yeah.
Yeah. I did not know that they disassembled the ship. I thought maybe they just passed it across, like, similar to how they did in the movie. I mean, not exactly, but I didn't know they disassembled it. That's good information to know.
Yeah, so there's definitely differences between the real events and the events of the movie, and I think towards the end of this video we're going to discuss sort of the ethics of how a historical event was portrayed. But I think first we should just go into the film itself a little bit and talk about, did we enjoy it? What was it about? So I'll do my best to give a super brief synopsis, and you guys feel free to interrupt me at any point and butt in a little bit. But essentially, in the film, you have a businessman who is in Brazil, or in Peru, actually, and it's in the Amazon rainforest, and he is down on his luck. He's tried a few business ventures. He tried making a railroad over the Andes, failed. He tried making it in the ice industry, failed. And he decides he's going to try his luck in the rubber industry. And similar to real events, there is a tract of land with, many millions of rubber trees that is inaccessible because the river that you would use to access it, and this is how all goods were transported in the Amazon, was by river. There was a strait of rapids that you couldn't get through by steamship. But Fitzcarraldo has this crazy idea that he is going to go up a different river, which at one point comes very close to the other river, past where the rapids are, and he's going to drag a ship over the mountain, and then basically he'll have a ship that can use that river to transport goods, and then the only part that they have to carry the rubber is just over this little isthmus. And so in the film, they purchase a ship, they get it up there. It's in hostile territory, and there's a bunch of hostile natives that it seems like they're going to be a problem, but it turns out that they actually want to help them. And Fitzcarraldo doesn't know why the natives want to help them do this ridiculous task, but they do. And at the end of the movie, spoiler alert, they make it over the hill, and they are having a party to celebrate, and then the natives cut the steamship loose, send it down the river uncontrolled and down the rapids where it is basically destroyed. And you learn that the natives were helping them in order to basically make a sacrifice to the gods of that river because they believed that there was a curse on it. Big twist at the end of the film. But that's a very broad synopsis. So, I will put it to you guys. How did you feel about this film?
The actual film itself, it was very long and it was sort of grueling to get through. I actually enjoyed doing research on the production of the film more so than I actually enjoyed watching the film. That when the context is added, it makes it more enjoyable in retrospect. But if you ask me, how did I enjoy the 2 hours and 37 minutes of the film itself? I wouldn't say it's my cup of tea, but again, the events surrounding the creation of this film are very interesting, and I'm glad that we watched this film.
How about you, Kevin?
Well, I do like the idea of being turned on to new films. However, this one did not hit with me. I found it very difficult, as Will said, to get through the movie. To be honest with you, I fell asleep the first 2 attempts. It took me 3 tries to get through it. As he said, this movie is 2 hours and 37 minutes long. That is 8 minutes longer than Avengers Infinity War. It is 5 minutes longer than Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. Those are both great movies. This one was not. I was intrigued by the story being based on, actual events, but the pace of the movie itself was very, very slow, albeit at times very boring. I found it, like I said, difficult to make it through. I was not happy with this movie. And I hate to say that because I know you love this movie, but it just was not my cup of tea.
I think this is a rare case where I actually respect what went into making the film so much. Like, that's the art to me. The art is doing research and discovering how they created the film. I respect that. I don't like the finished product. It's just not my cup of tea. I know that some people love this movie. Some very highly esteemed directors would put this in their top 10 best films of all time. I do highly respect the monumental effort that went into making this film, and I think this is a very unique case because I think the production of the film is almost more historically significant than the events it's based off of.
I could agree with a lot of what you just said, and it is definitely a slow movie. It's a movie from the early 80s, and a lot of movies from that time period that were not like mainstream movies oftentimes leaned into sort of like agonizingly slow pacing sometimes. And for instance, one of the first scenes in the film, it puts you into an opera, which is in another language. It's not in English. You can't understand it. And it's on one shot of this opera performance for like 5 minutes. I think it's like 5+ minutes. Um, and there's similar things like that. The whole movie is quite slow. I do enjoy watching it, and I think part of that is it almost to me feels more like a documentary than a film. There's almost no visual effects used in the entire film. There's no digital effects. The only practical effect they used was a miniature at one point when the ship is going down the rapids.
And you can tell. Yeah, I caught that.
Yep.
I was like, that's a toy boat.
Yep. But
it was pretty good though for the time period. That was pretty good that they used the miniature boat. It made it feel realistic. It took me, with prying eyes to actually catch it. I didn't catch it immediately. I caught it pretty quickly, but not immediately. It was a good effect for the time period. So I did appreciate that.
Yeah, in terms of things that I enjoyed while watching it, I just think it's very, very grounded. Everything that you see is real, is really happening. Well, almost. And there's just little things, little additions, like watching the way that the rubber was produced from carving these little slits in the bark that coalesce, these lines that coalesce, and then at the bottom it all drips kind of like a sap. And then the way that they drip it onto this spit and spin it until they have this gigantic just rubber, log. And things like watching them cast the propeller for the steamship when they're building that.
I thought that was pretty neat.
Yeah, like watching, these very primitive but also ingenious ways of doing things. Chopping down a tree that's like 20 feet in diameter. There's just a lot of really impressive things to watch, and so yeah, it's certainly not entertaining in the way that a lot of films are, but I did find it felt educational almost to me. So that's what I would say. But I will also grant you guys, it's slow, and it's not everyone's cup of tea. Not at all.
I felt like the whole opera thing didn't need to be included. Like, you could have made a great story. Fitzcarraldo wanted to be a rubber baron, and you made the story around that. The whole opera thing kind of threw it off. It kind of took away from the actual point of the story, in my opinion. Had it been just about him making money in the rubber industry and the stuff he went through to make it happen on that tract of land that was impossible to make money on, that would have been a good movie. But I think the fact that his whole intention was to bring opera to a certain part of Peru kind of was like a subplot that was unneeded. But it ended up being the main plot. So
I actually think that part of the film is like very, very necessary because Fitzcarraldo himself is very eccentric and his pursuit is like an impossible task. And throughout the film, he's held back by almost everything, and he overcomes these immense natural events just to pursue something as like I don't even know what the proper phrase would be, but just to pursue something that doesn't matter, like opera. The natives don't care about opera. The forest doesn't care about opera. Opera is not going to bring a booming industry to that part of the world, but he's willing, like the rubber, the ice, the railway, those are all a means to an end, and his end goal is to simply bring something that he personally enjoys to the area. So I think the ridiculousness of that in itself is a good inclusion in the film because it helps characterize him as sort of a madman.
It definitely characterizes his madness, because the opening of the film, when we're watching this opera for a very long time, he and his partner arrive after having rowed hundreds of miles on the Amazon. His hands are bleeding. They probably haven't slept in days. They're just disheveled and exhausted, and they claw their way basically into this opera, and it's like the best moment of his life as he's watching this the last like 2 minutes of an opera
Yeah, it's
after
the
having
best
rode for
30
days.
seconds of his life.
Right. And then that was in the big town. I actually I don't remember where that was. It was in a very large city that already had an opera house, obviously, but it was in South America. And then he wants to build an opera house in Iquitos, which is a very small village, 2,500 miles up the Amazon. So we're talking extremely secluded in no, in like, it's not about to become a booming town. Even today, it's small. Um, and so it certainly establishes that he is madly in love in opera to the point where, or madly in love with opera to the point where uh, he'll do anything for it, and his goals make no sense. It also provides his character motivations other than money, though, and I think I almost wonder if part of the reason for including opera was Herzog's attempt to make the character of Fitzcarraldo more sympathetic, because okay, we've established the real Fitzcarraldo was probably not so good a guy, did a lot of killing and enslaving of natives, and the character in the movie is portrayed as a pretty good guy, an empathetic and compassionate man to some extent. But if he was just doing all this just to make a boatload of money, okay, who cares? Some guy trying to get rich. But he has a purpose. He wants to build an opera house. That's his goal. So that would be my perspective.
Did the original Fitzcarraldo enslave the natives?
Yeah, yeah. He did a lot of enslaving. I mean, he was like a bit. That's another thing. I mean, he wasn't like some struggling businessman that like, the isthmus, the crossing of the isthmus was like finally he was able to make a living. No, this was like an extremely powerful. I mean, this might as well have been like a Rockefeller type character in South America, and yeah, he like killed a lot of natives. He would like yeah, enslaving hundreds of them. It wasn't pretty. It was not pretty at all.
That would have been a great movie.
Yeah, I mean it's a question. Um, but let's transition a little bit into the making of the film. So Will, you said that you enjoyed more learning about how the film was made than watching the film itself, to the point where you even find the making of the film is more historically pertinent than the events that the film are based on.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think we should start by talking about the casting. I'm not sure how much you guys know about that specifically, but
A
the
little bit.
original intention was to get Jack Nicholson to play Fitzcarraldo, but they simply could not afford him. I think he required 5 million or so dollars, and a small West German film company is just not going to be able to afford somebody like him, an A-lister like that.
Where did you
So
find that information?
research.
I ran across it as well. I don't remember exactly what website.
We'll say that's speculative, just to be careful, but I did come across that
I
information.
mean, that's interesting to hear, but I mean, just saying it the way you said it made it sound like you just made it up right there. But
Not at
No, I
all.
saw that too.
I
A
I
lot of
have
the
to believe you because I didn't research it as much as you did. I do know that the original star was Jason Robards, and he became sick halfway through filming, and then Klaus Kinski, um, was hired by Herzog, and I don't understand why because I also found out that he did three other movies with him, and they did not get along on any of those movies. So I was curious about the casting. So I'm sorry for interrupting, but continue.
Right.
I just
So
thought that
that
was
that actually that brings me to my next point. So it seems like even with the casting, at every single step, they were running into an issue. So the second gentleman, you just said his name, it's slipping my mind, but he became afflicted with dysentery 40%
huh.
of the way through filming, and he actually had to completely leave the country, and he was not allowed to return by his doctors because they thought that he would have died if he came back and contracted dysentery again. So 40% of the filming is done, and at that point they essentially have to start over from scratch. So
Did you see who his co-star was?
Mick Jagger, that's also very strange. So because of this little mishap, we'll call it a mishap, Mick Jagger could no longer stick around and he had to go on tour with the Rolling Stones. He had other obligations that were probably far more lucrative. So at this point, Werner Herzog has to deal with the fact that his film has not started the way that he wants it to. So, as sort of a third option, he recruits Klaus Kinski. And this, in my opinion, this greatly shifts the tone of the film just because of who Klaus Kinski is. So, the character of Fitzcarraldo is an Irish businessman. And with Klaus, he's now being played by a German, a very boisterous, eccentric German, and in my honest opinion, it sort of clashes. The character is clashing with it himself at all times. I don't think it's a very, I mean, I can't say the casting choice was bad because it obviously worked out, but on paper, it's just not. It's not good. It makes the character have more weight than he should. So casting, yeah, complete mishaps. But apart from those issues, there were also a ton of issues with the native populations around them. That was a very real thing. That wasn't just within the film. That actually plagued the film's production to a very large extent. In fact, Werner Herzog constructed an entire set, a village, for the film, and the indigenous populations thought that he was essentially trying to get one over on them. So they threatened everyone on the set, forced them to leave, and then burned it down in the middle of the night. That's just an example of something that took place. So Werner Herzog had to deal with natural issues, clashes at basically every step. And that's just the beginning.
Oh yeah, there is so much that happened. And everything that happened is that delayed production was so much worse than it would be for a normal film because the whole time they're living in the Amazon. Very, very, very secluded portion of the Amazon as well. Iquitos, which was sort of their like base point, the nearest actual sort of city that you could like fly in and out of. It's 2,500 miles up the Amazon, right? But their filming locations for where they crossed the mountain was an additional 1,000 miles upriver on a different river, not the Amazon, from Iquitos. And so, I mean, you're talking about, in terms of how hostile your environment is and how secluded you are, the Amazon, I mean, I think about what the westward expansion that we hear about in the United States and the stories of crossing the Rocky Mountains and the deserts and all of that. I think the Amazon puts that to absolute shame. Navigating that environment is far more difficult. And even in the 80s, and even today to some extent, it is an extremely difficult place just to exist. So that's definitely one thing to think about. Yeah, it's like when an actor, you've gotten 40% of the way through filming and you lose an actor and have to recast, and you've already been living in the jungle for 3-4 months. I think filming was a total of 8 months that they were there. It's a long time to be living in a hostile environment like that. Kevin, did you run across any stories from production?
No, the thing I came across the most was just Klaus Kinski's attitude and his behavior. I did read something about one of the extras from one of the natives that was cast as an extra offered to kill him.
It was a chief.
He was the chief of the tribe. He offered to Werner Herzog, he said, we could kill Kinski for you. And Herzog said, no, I need him to finish filming. I did read that part. I thought that was hilarious. But yeah. I could totally see that because watching this movie, I don't know if it was the way he played the character or the actor himself, but I did not like him. Something about him I did not like him at all.
I feel like most people who interacted with him would agree with you there.
Yeah, it just something about him rubbed me the wrong way. Also, I never knew that he was supposed to be an Irish businessman because the German just protruded from him like I mean, I literally
Yeah.
thought he was a German. He was playing a German
No.
because his German just sticks out so much. So, and I think that was bad acting in and of itself. I mean, if you're going to play an Irish businessman, at least be Irish. Wear some green. I mean, geez.
They probably should have scrapped the Irish idea. But back to
Yeah.
some issues with production itself. Kevin, Alex, I don't know if you guys came across this, but there's a rumor that they were on the set for so long, and they obviously can't leave, that the men started to get very, very antsy, we'll say. And a tribal elder told Werner Herzog, listen, if they don't interact with women, they're going to go insane. So it's alleged that Werner actually ended up hiring prostitutes to sort of appease those
Hmm.
male desires just so they could get through filming. And let me say this, one thing that happened that was probably extremely tedious and depressing and disheartening for the crew and cast is the fact that the steamboat actually got stuck on a sandbar. And they had to wait for 2 months for the water levels to rise again so that they could just simply resume filming, simply move it. So, Alex, to your point, they were very much fighting the Amazonian elements throughout the entirety of this filming process.
Yeah, and there was just so many things. There at one point a plane crashed, didn't kill anyone, but several people were injured. Which the only way they were able to get supplies was by plane. And when the river was at flood stage, the runway was flooded, and so they would just airdrop supplies to them. But yeah, so you had a plane crash. There was one time that someone was chainsawing to clear a path of some kind and got bit by a highly venomous snake on his foot, and because he was barefoot, and he thought for about 5 seconds, and then he chainsawed his own leg off to prevent the venom from spreading and killing him, and he did end up surviving.
That's smart.
Uh,
That's
yeah,
like Saw.
I mean, that takes some balls right there to do that, but
yeah, it's
that's a
pretty
survival
ridiculous.
instinct. That's a survival instinct. I had to give it credit for that one.
So when towards the end of the film, when the steamship gets sent downriver and it goes through a strait of rapids, a portion of that like the really extreme looking portion they did with miniatures, but they did actually ride the steamship down a pretty gnarly section of river. And Herzog originally said, like, let's just set up cameras and no one's going to be on it. It's too dangerous. But he got a bunch of volunteers. So it's like, no, let's do this. And even Kinski with his, we'll get more into Kinski's personality, but he's a total egomaniac and he's a total wimp when it comes to physical adversity. But he was like, oh, I want to go on. We're all going to do this together. And it was so violent when the ship was impacting with rocks on the side of the river, that one of the cameramen, he was holding a 40-pound camera. He got sent flying, basically, and the camera landed on his hand and basically split his hand in half. And when they fixed him up, once they got to safety and they were able to fix him up, they didn't have any anesthesia because they had just used it on someone who took an arrow to the neck from a native. And so they had to like piece his hand together with no anesthesia. Yeah, that pretty much runs me dry of wild production stories, except for the things that Klaus Kinski got into.
I'm starting to agree with Will that the production of this movie was much better than the movie itself.
Yeah,
Freaking
and
arrows to the neck, chainsawing feet off, and
yeah,
mean,
like I
sounds
genuinely,
awesome.
I really think that the historical event of this film production is more significant than what it's based off of. And I don't know if there's ever been another movie like that. That's my interpretation. I don't know if you guys agree with that.
I kind of do. And, in a lot of ways, I think this film is a metaphor for itself. Because just as Fitzcarraldo's efforts, his mad perseverance, his utter lunacy, um, ultimately yield nothing. Similarly, the madness of Herzog and the insane lengths they went to create this film ended up producing a somewhat lackluster and certainly not very popular film. Uh, I enjoy it, but I don't even know that they made a profit on it. Um,
It has gained a pretty significant cult following, though, in recent years.
yeah, I mean
So
it's
I guess you're part of
appreciated.
that.
Yeah, and it is appreciated as a film. It's just like the end product after everything that they put into it doesn't really match with the effort that they put in, which is kind of funny. Uh,
So you just drew some parallels between Herzog and Carlos Fitzcarraldo, both pursuing almost impossible tasks for essentially no reason. Um, I think another unfortunate parallel is the fact that they both very clearly, I should say all three, very clearly exploited natives. Fitzcarraldo, that the real guy, exploited natives. The fictional Fitzcarraldo exploited natives, and Werner Herzog exploited natives. So the native population lost at every single turn, both real and fake here.
well, I think there's
Question.
certainly
I
different
got a
degrees.
question.
Go ahead.
Well, of
In
course,
in
I mean,
the
and
in the movie, did Fitzcarraldo, is it really considered exploitation? I mean, they kind of just threw themselves into the gig. They didn't force anybody to do it because he kept questioning the entire movie. Why are they doing this? Why are they doing this? So is that technically exploitation?
oh yeah, you're talking about the fictional Fitzcarraldo within the
Yeah,
film, correct? Yeah, that
correct.
entire the rubber baron that he gets the steamboat from is extremely exploitative of the natives and their environment.
Yeah,
Molly,
him.
you know Molly, the businesswoman that
Mm-hmm.
Fitzcarraldo interacts with, she runs a brothel
A
that's
brothel.
where all the women are native people. Like she's exploiting their physical bodies for profit. Like everybody within this film that's like a tycoon or a baron or whatever, they're all exploiting the native population's resources, lack of understanding, and their actual physical bodies. So that's, or at least that's how I'm viewing it.
Yeah, I mean they whitewashed a little bit in the film where Fitzcarraldo appears to treat the natives with respect. Um, just to for the most part, and they certainly aren't just like killing them left and right. They're not forcing them to do things at gunpoint. And like you said, Kevin, the actual tribal people that help them pull the boat up the hill, they just completely volunteer themselves for that. Um, but the exploitation is there. It's just not quite as outright. Now, in terms of Herzog exploiting natives, I don't know about that.
That one
I mean,
I
he
can
could
kind of agree with
have.
that.
I I'm interested. Like, did you read some stuff about how natives were treated in the production of the film?
Yeah,
'Cause
so the scene where the steamboat is actually pulled over the isthmus with the pulley system, Herzog was told by a Brazilian, I guess I don't know what the proper profession would be, but essentially he had somebody there to tell him what is the likelihood that we can actually physically accomplish this, and what is the likelihood that people will die. And this, I mean, this is on film. I watched the conversation take place, but this Brazilian dude essentially tells Herzog, you have a 70% chance of this thing snapping loose and killing like 20 of these native people. And Herzog said, "We've gotten to this point. We have to keep going." So if think about this in modern terms. If it's 2025 and a director is told by a professional, "Hey, if you pull off this stunt, you have the potential to kill up to 25 members of your cast and crew," and that director still goes through with that, that's a little insane. That's definitely maybe not direct exploitation, but in a way it kind of is because Herzog had them specifically building the contraptions to pull the ship over. I mean, it really paralleled the actual events that took place. He certainly didn't enslave anyone, and I'm not saying that it's comparable in that regard, but exploitative, yeah.
well, I guess I would be curious if, like, if the people who were participating knew how dangerous it was. Because I wouldn't say that performing a practical effect for a film that's extremely dangerous and could kill people, I wouldn't say that that's necessarily exploiting the people who are participating. It's only exploiting them if they don't understand what they're getting into, and they may not have understood. Uh, but they also may have. They may they may have been willing. I'm not sure. Um, now I
Yeah, and they may have been getting paid pennies to do it as well.
I did
So
hear
they could
they
have
were
been.
actually getting paid a lot. I could be wrong. Did you guys hear anything about
I
that? I
didn't
think they
see
were.
anything about that.
I didn't see how much they got paid. I mean, I know they were paid, but uh, also a little bit disappointing, but also sort of obvious if you think about it. I don't know if you guys know, they didn't actually pull the steamship over the mountain using manpower. They did a very
In the
convincing job
movie,
of
no.
making it. Yeah, they made it look really really good, but they used a Caterpillar engine and and steel cables to pull it up the hill. They just hid all of that and also rigged up all of the ropes. Like the mechanisms that the ropes were attached to, like did actually spin if the ship slid down the mountain. Um, but they did not actually pull the ship up the hill using manpower, sadly.
Yeah, I don't know if I thought that they did it that way, but I wasn't aware of that there was a literal caterpillar pulling it. I didn't know that, so that's
Yeah, and
interesting.
yeah, it was an engine, and it was so loud that like they couldn't use any of the audio from when the ship was being drug. Um, it was so loud, like you could hear the engine, so they couldn't use that audio. But but yeah, did Herzog exploit natives? Um, I think that's probably a pretty tough question and a little bit gray,
Yeah.
in my opinion.
Well, when you're dealing with a group of people who legitimately think that like killing your lead actor is an option, you have to realize they might not understand that it's extremely bad taste for them to be performing stunts where they could be brutally killed. They might not they might see that as okay, but within like uh East or West German film studio standards, that might not be okay at all. Does that you see what I'm saying here?
Perhaps like I guess a, a an analogous situation could be like, oh yeah, we have this ceremony that the tribal people, we have a ceremony that we put our young men through for their coming of age ceremony, and it like 30% of them die when they do it. Do you want to film it as part of this story? And you could say like, well, sure, go ahead, and then like you're saying, well, maybe the tribal people think that's okay, but like to film people basically killing themselves as a part of your film to make money off of that is kind of not good taste.
I can somewhat disagree with that,
Okay.
and hear me out. I'm not a sadist or anything, but this is something that natives have been doing. You said as a coming of age thing. This would be similar to filming a nature program or something. Like when a lion takes out a baby gazelle, you want to save the baby gazelle, but in reality, this is nature. This is what happens. If this is something the tribe's been doing for years and this is their ritual, and yeah, 30% of them die, I mean, if they're not going to change their ways because 30% of the way people die, why not film it and have it, on record as, I mean, I understand making money from it. That's bad. That's bad taste. But to film it and have it on record so, historically we can know what it is and learn from it and have that experience. I mean, I kind of agree with that part of it. I mean, you don't want to watch a kid, go through a ritual and die and then just make money off of it. That's poor taste, but
No, I see where you're coming from and agree with you for the most part. I guess the difficult distinctions come when it's like, well, are you filming it for a documentary or are you filming it for like a fictional movie? And are they doing it anyway, or are you sort of rigging part of it where you're requesting that they do it on set or something like that? Like
yeah,
things
I
could get
mean,
real hairy real quick.
yeah, you don't help them improve that on that 30%, but like if you film it, as say a fly on the wall, I don't see anything wrong with that because that's just nature. That's the way they've lived their lives for forever.
Right.
Obviously, you wouldn't want to stack the deck in favor of somebody dying or the other way around, as long as there's no interference from the outside world. I see nothing wrong with it, to be honest with you. It's
I
sad, but
think something important that we need to cover is the fact that two people were actually killed during filming.
was it
I'm
just
not.
two? I thought it was more than that.
Was it more than two? I heard two. Alex,
Everything
Two or
what do you
everything
think?
I've
three.
read said several, and I would think several more than two is several,
Do
or
you guys
several's
know
more than
the
two.
circumstances of their deaths?
I was reading some a writing by one of the film crew who said that uh, there were a couple deaths that occurred off camera. They were drownings, I think, and like Herzog
Mm.
had specifically said like you don't need to do this, but a couple natives decided to like go out in boats anyway, and then they ended up drowning, and it wasn't even on film. It was like just kind of an accident, but that's what I saw.
So nobody was, and I didn't see this, and I'm just posing the question. Nobody was actually crushed by the mechanics to pull the steamboat.
People were injured during that. I don't know about
Yeah,
killed.
yeah. I'm not sure. I heard about the injuries. I'm just because there was the scene in the film where the native is actually crushed by the mechanism.
Oh, that wasn't real.
No, I know that wasn't real.
Okay,
I'm
okay.
just saying. I'm just saying that would have been very bad taste if they put that into the film and then that had actually taken place on set, a few
Hmm.
days
Yeah, that would
previously.
be poor taste.
I
I
just
do
wasn't
remember the part
sure.
where he was like, we have two dead bodies."
But we haven't talked about how this turns out for good old Fitzcarraldo. I feel like that's something we need to cover as well.
I guess I briefly covered it in my synopsis.
Well, he
Uh,
gets his wish, but just not in the way that he envisioned, which is I think it's personally a strange ending, where the steamboat is what he was trying to get over the isthmus to get the rubber resources so that he could fund building an actual opera house. But in the end of the film, um, as the steamboat is still in his possession, he ends up hosting sort of a floating opera on it. So he did end up bringing the opera to that part of the world, just not in the way that he um, predicted at all. And I don't know if that's supposed to be considered a happy ending or not, but to me, it just sort of hammers home the fact that all of his efforts were for nothing. And
I
the
feel like
native
he,
deaths within the film were for nothing.
I feel like he gave up too easily. After the boat hit the rapids, it was still floating, and he's like, "Fuck it, let's sell the boat. We're done." I feel like he still could have finished. He still could have accomplished what he set out to do. It's not like the boat sank. I don't
He
get
would
the
have just pulled
whole.
it back over the hill again.
Well, no, the whole intention was to get it. Why would you put it over the hill and then put it back over the hill? I mean, his intention was to go up that other river, correct?
Well, I thought when it got cut loose in the rapids, it basically went back to its original position because he was trying to avoid the rapids in the first place. Am I right or am I wrong?
yeah, it's a little bit confusing, and it's also not true, and it I don't even think it necessarily works. But according to the film, his plan is to bypass this series of rapids by getting the ship over the hill, and then the ship would stay on that other river, upriver from the rapids. It would never go down the rapids, and it would just be used to go back and forth between the rubber trees and that crossing point. But the ship would never cross again. It would
Yeah.
unload the rubber, they would cross it and put it on another ship on the original river, which can be used by ship. And so when this ship got sent down to the rapids, that was like irreversible. You can't go back up the rapids. He had to go all the way through. And to your point, Kevin, I mean, he could have tried to get it back over the hill and
That's what I
attempted his
said.
plan again.
That's what I
But
said.
the
Okay,
thing is,
I missed the
oh,
part
sorry.
that. Yeah, I missed the part. I guess when that it actually sent him back. I just thought that um I thought the rapids was on the other side of the river, that they were crossing before the rapids. So I didn't realize that when it hit the rapids after being set loose that it went that far back.
Yeah, it basically went back to his starting point, but it didn't matter
Okay.
because he still got some form of what he wanted.
it's fine. There's maps in the film, and they did try to like explain it, but it's still confusing exactly what his plan was. But yeah, I mean, the thing is, even if he wanted to try it a second time, that we find out that the whole reason that the tribal people in that area were helping him was so that they could sacrifice the ship. So if they tried it again, they would probably just fight them and kill them. And it's expressed several times in the film that like the crew of the ship is extremely outgunned by the natives. Like if the natives had wanted to kill them, they could have.
Well, that's why
Absolutely.
the crew left, correct?
Part of the crew left because they realized they were going into hostile territory. But the crew that stayed, I mean, they had guns and dynamite and everything, but it was expressed that it was like, no, there's too many. There's hundreds of these tribal people, and they're pretty good with bows. And yeah, if they want us dead, we will be dead.
I was kind of disappointed after the introduction of the tribe when they were all chasing the boat. There's hundreds of them in little kayaks, and they were dropping the trees in the river, to keep the boat from going backwards. It's like, okay, now it's gonna get exciting. People are gonna die. Shit's about to hit the fan. And then it went nowhere, and I was disappointed. I really wanted a little bit of action in this movie. It didn't go anywhere, and maybe I'm just because I'm stuck on that genre of always seeing something blow up or somebody die or blood gore. So I was a little unready for the slow pace, but I felt like the story never really developed.
Well, I think thematically that makes sense because Fitzcarraldo he was never in control. The natives and nature were always in control.
Mm-hmm.
Fitzcarraldo may have had the illusion of being in control. That Dutch captain may have had the illusion of being in control as well. But at the end of this story, they were always at the behest of the natives, and they were always going to be cut loose once they made it across because they were far outnumbered and they could have been killed instantly. So if you think about it, um, the natives are sort of just an extension of nature, and Fitzcarraldo had no control over nature. Nobody does.
And I think that is one of the big themes of the film. In the last episode, we talked about, Kevin, you said that the whole point of a film is to make you feel something. And so if I ask myself, like, what was I feeling during a large portion of this film? Honestly, it was sort of a combination of claustrophobia, helplessness, seclusion, isolation, just all of those things together because yeah, they are in this environment at which they're helpless to the forces of the river, the forces of the native people, the forces of the jungle. I mean, like if you go on Google Earth or satellite images and you go and you try to trace the river uh, from Iquitos to the filming locations, which I did try to do that, it is like nightmarish. That country is so endless. It's just endless rainforest everywhere. And at the start of the film, it says that the region that they're in, the natives call the land where God did not finish his creation. And I think that's a very apt description of just I mean, we're talking about an area the size of probably most of the U.S. or like half the U.S., something like that. Um, just completely covered in insanely dense rainforest. Uh, so yeah, that's kind of what I felt.
Speaking of forces of nature, I feel like we should talk a little bit about Klaus Kinski.
We did kind of brush over him a little bit. Yeah, so I've seen a documentary called My Best Fiend, and it's made by Herzog, and it's about Herzog's and Kinski's relationship, which they knew each other over many decades. Um, and there's a lot of stories in that film that characterize a little bit of just how unhinged Kinski was. Where when Herzog was living with him for a while, and at one point Kinski took a full running. He ran down the hallway, jumped and hit a door squarely, knocked it off of its hinges, and starts screaming about how his laundry wasn't done correctly. Uh, there was one point where he locked himself in a bathroom for 48 hours, just screaming and raving and destroying the bathroom for 48 hours straight without coming out. Um, Things like that were basically just like normal for Kinski. And yet somehow Herzog managed to find camaraderie with him, and they ended up working on many films together. Quite a good number of films. What sorts of things have you learned about Kinski, Will?
I feel like most notably, he fought for Germany in World War II. His mother was actually killed by Allied forces. His father died during the war. I'm not sure if it was by Allied forces or just he happened to die. He was actually diagnosed with psychopathy. Um, he is a very loud and quick to anger individual. Um, I don't even think that he's that different from the actual character of Fitzcarraldo. At least it's hard to separate him from the character because he's such a big personality that he overtook what Fitzcarraldo was supposed to be portrayed as. Like Kevin said earlier, you can just throw the Irishman thing out the window because Klaus Kinski took over immediately.
He did come off as disturbed. I couldn't tell if that was bad acting or if that was the actor himself.
Oh, it's the actor
But
himself.
he seemed off, and like I said, there was something about him I just did not like. And maybe that may have led to me not liking the movie as well. But uh, Claude Kinski came off as just, I don't know, the kind of guy I don't really want to pay attention to. I know he did
He's
four movies with Werner Herzog. I haven't seen any of them, but I know he
I'm
had
not
issues
sure what
with
the
every
total
single
number
one of
is.
them.
Well, they always had issues. I mean, through their whole life, they didn't get along, quote unquote, but they still always came back together, and they did have like affectionate feelings towards one another as friends. They just also would threaten to kill each other every now and then. Um, and in terms of the morality of a person, like if you can make judgments about like, oh, could you ever say that uh, Kinski was a good person in any way? I mean, that's a very difficult question to answer. When someone is utterly insane, a complete egomaniac, um, a psychopath, a actual diagnosed psychopath, things like that. Can you have a meaningful, genuine relationship with someone like that? It's a tough question. But in my opinion, what is easier to answer is, can a person like that bring something to character roles for film that a sane person maybe never could? And I think that the answer is yes. I think that Kinski brought a uh, a genuine madness to genuinely mad characters that m- makes them more believable. Uh, like, yeah, when I see Fitzcarraldo ringing the bell and saying to the town, this church will remain closed until I have my opera house. I need an opera house. I believe that. I believe it because Kinski portrays the madness so effectively. Uh, and you can actually watch like that same scene when it was Mick Jagger and what was it, Robert something, the previously cast roles. It doesn't have the same weight at all. They're just actors.
I wasn't alive in the 1980s, but I could see Klaus Kinski being typecast as Fitzcarraldo. And what I'm trying to say is everybody just permanently seeing him as that character for the rest of his career. I don't know if that happened, but he overtook the character in a way where I feel like Klaus Kinski's portrayal of Fitzcarraldo is more historically significant than Carlos Fitzcarraldo within human history.
Yeah, I doubt that he was seen as Fitzcarraldo or Fitzcarraldo uh, for his later roles, just because he had such a long career. I think he was in well over 100 films over the course of his career, and I think he was originally established probably in the '60s, maybe even the '50s. Uh, I should look into his filmography, but I think by the time he was in Fitzcarraldo, he was already pretty well known as just like, yeah, that crazy actor that is in everything. Um, but I agree with you that his portrayal uh, of Fitzcarraldo certainly defining of that character. But I want to watch more movies with Kinski in it just to see, does he come across the same way in every film, or does he actually kind of change from character to character? I really want to watch Nosferatu, which now it's perfect because now there's a new Nosferatu, and I would like to see the new one and compare it to to Kinski's version. But yeah, I'm intrigued by the character, and Kevin, it's definitely reasonable to look at someone like him and be put off by his insanity. But I guess I just have a different perspective on. I find that some of the most like insane people are some of the most interesting to me to watch, which is kind of how I feel.
Well, now in his defense, this is the only Klaus Kinski movie I've seen. This is the only Werner Herzog movie I've seen. So maybe he does do better work in other movies. But as far as this movie, I did not like the actor he portrayed. I did not, the character he portrayed. I didn't like the actor that was portraying that character. So maybe just a one and done kind of thing. But I don't know. Something about him, just like I said, rubbed me the wrong way.
So, a question, and I don't have an answer to this question necessarily, but in reality, I'm not a historian, but my impression of the historical figure of Fitzcarraldo is that he took advantage of lots of people and ultimately benefited off of it. But in the movie, the native population triumphs over Fitzcarraldo and manages to, basically keep their land and screw over the person who is trying to take advantage of them. Do you guys think that it is a net positive or a net negative to have your fictional work that is based off of a true story change the story in this manner?
Not to have a cop-out answer, but in this particular case, I believe it's whether it's net positive or net negative, it's so insignificant of an impact that it almost like doesn't matter. And I'm not like some master when it comes to like knowing film and knowing every film that's ever been released, but I had never even heard of this before you mentioned it to me. So if you're talking about something super culturally significant within either American society or world history, I believe that you have to portray it somewhat accurately. Like if something had caused a lot of death or enslavement or anything like that, you sort of have to at least like acknowledge that happened. But when it's some like obscure Peruvian rubber baron who took apart a ship and took it over a piece of land, I think it's like insignificant.
I didn't really understand the full question.
I could rephrase it a little bit.
Yeah, like, rephrase it for me just so I can understand completely.
Do you think that the retelling where the natives essentially win in a way in the film, do you think that that's more of like an empowering take or more of a cover up for bad stuff?
No, I just think it's more I think it's more along the lines of creative freedom. I mean, most of the time when you make a movie based on historical things, the historical facts are boring and not movie worthy. So they have to change up the story a bit to make it interesting. For example, the movie Pearl Harbor, great movie. Pearl Harbor, there was not much historically about it that was very interesting other than it brought America into the war. So, of course, they're going to put a Hollywood spin on it and make it more interesting of a story. Obviously, they're not going to film a movie showing the exploitation of the natives. They're not going to show the cruelty and the enslavement of the natives. They're just going to show something that's going to get people in butts and seats at the theaters, basically.
Alex, when you phrase that question again, I sort of have a different answer.
Okay.
So when we're talking about this event, which this is not historical fiction, I personally believe it's more just fiction inspired loosely by a historical event. And with that being the parameters, I think it's what they did is okay. And I also think that logistically they would have ran into a lot of issues if they tried to portray it accurately, because like we were talking about earlier, the native population, they're not familiar with film. They're not familiar with the film industry. So Werner Herzog showing up and essentially convincing them to behave as literal slaves for a film, I don't even know if they would have accepted that. So in a way, portraying it accurately could have been seen as very demeaning for the population. They probably, the natives themselves, I'm just speculating here, they probably would much rather it go the way that it went than having them Werner Herzog show up and say, okay, in this scene you're gonna get beaten, in this scene you're gonna die, in this scene they're gonna like kill your son, like you know what I mean?
I had that same thought myself at one point. I was thinking of like, yeah, well, what if he had decided, no, we're going to be more true to history and show things how they really were? And it's like, what would that have been like for the natives? Yeah, for those tribal people. You know, there was a lot of language barriers on set. There's a lot of pointing and gesturing. And yeah, when you're not able to fully explain real time, like, by the way, like, this was a bad thing and we're portraying it to show people that a bad thing happened. No, it's just like, okay, get over there and we're gonna put blood on you and we're gonna show this white person like spearing you 6 times. It's like, okay, yeah, I can see where you're coming from there. There's just also a little part of me that feels like a little bit of history was kind of covered up. Uh, so I'm a little bit neutral on that aspect of it.
It may not have been covered up in the sense that we would have never heard about that event happening in history if not for this film. This film kind of sparked our interest in the actual historical context behind it, and I hope that that's happened for a lot of people who have seen the film as well. So I literally agree with either side of the argument because I could see benefits for both.
So we'd really like to hear you, the viewers, your opinion as well. If you're watching this video and you've seen Fitzcarraldo, or maybe even if you haven't and you just listened to this conversation, what do you think about the film? What do you think about Kinski? Let us know in the comments. We'll be sure to respond to you. Um, and also, if you have any suggestions for movies that you think we would enjoy looking at, definitely drop that in the comments and like and subscribe.
Oh, there it is.
Thanks for watching if you made it to this point. We really appreciate it.